Hello, and welcome to Intelligence Network Crime Event Review number 4. I'm going back to the old way of doing this because I've lost some recordings, okay, that my new microphone didn't manage to get down into my Android machine efficiently enough to actually record the voice, right? So recently had issues re-recording a certain movie sync review, number 62 for Hollywood Review. Third take on it's kind of boring. It's like rechewing food you just ate. Second take, somehow awesome, lost. First take, pretty good, lost. So that system's finished, you know, and nobody needs to be reading my fingerprints, tapping on the table while I'm talking, no matter how good the microphone sounds. So I'm right back to this old Sony device that works. You know, it's actually a surprisingly good microphone with a red button on it that I can use that indicates I am recording. It's got a red light that tells me it's recording. I am confident it is recording. Okay, so here we go. I've got to go through some issues I brought up in the last part of episode 3 because, you know, that was the third episode I had recorded on that particular day. I was beginning to lose my mind for the day. So I got to go through Son of Sam modus operandi again, taking into account kind of a balance between Manny Grossman's take and Maury Terry's take on the subject. Okay, keeping in mind that Maury Terry, contrary to what I was talking about on the previous recording, considered John Carr to be one of the trigger people at the Sons of Sam murders. Okay, along with David Berkowitz. That was something I kind of forgot about talking about, you know. Oh, he's an impulsive type that, you know, only, you know, shot at people, you know, radically like a lunatic or whatever. Apparently he did that according to Maury Terry. Okay, you know, media apparently, right? He's written into the book as an impulsive type. Overall, kind of fitting a certain character structure that even Wilhelm Reich self-described relative to being kind of, you know, impulsive. It's obviously the case with somebody like John Carr. And maybe in the end, he was trying to, you know, reincarnate out of that into like, you know, go ahead and go out for the evening, darling, and I'll take care of the dishes kind of a guy, thoughtful and all that kind of business, you know, being just, you know, around the house with the woman, you know, living a life and all that, but, you know, having to sacrifice his life to a shotgun suicide murder situation going on, network-wise, maybe. And then, of course, David Berkowitz being a compulsive tipple, you might say, in accordance with Wilhelm Reich's schema that he developed along those lines. Character typology. You're dealing with predictable factors, what are called structural factors, and formulating construct around certain ideas, which holds water in my view to this day. And in the fields of psychology, it's kind of been thrown to the side along with Freud in favor of certain other things that, you know, people feel more comfortable with, I suspect. Certain modern therapeutic modalities that are showing good progress, you know, in dealing with certain problems, though. Rather than augmenting, they're kind of replacing, and I don't think it's an adequate replacement for depth psychology. So we're discussing depth psychology terms here. Okay, characterology of depth. Takes on structure through momentum of a certain kind, right? Terrorism is not something you negotiate with, and organized crime is terrorism, and terrorism is organized crime. There's a psychology associated with it that we're looking at here. There's a characterology associated with it. Some of this characterology makes people feel uncomfortable. Getting back to what I was trying to discuss, characterology. Depth, it's a depth consideration. It's a particularly deep consideration of clinical significance, right? Deeper considerations would be healthy considerations that have not been modified or amplified or otherwise destroyed by neurosis or anything ongoing like that of a chronic nature. Once you've lost touch with that, getting back to it, it seems near impossible just because of what you're up against, right? Obstacle-wise. What you're up against is characterology, okay? Crowley understands the nature of it pretty well, in my view, based on his tarot card expression titled The Devil, okay? In quotes, indicating it's almost like an essay study in picture form, right? Or like a chapter taken from a book. If the entire tarot deck is a book, that one card is a significant chapter. All right. So that background Devil's Tower, right? It represents serious inclination. All right. With its own kind of momentum, dating back in time, right? Like stone. Hard stone, but volcanic stone, so it's associated with concepts like economy at some point in history, dating back into the past and into the present as part of the present day economy of the ecological system in the area, right? In psychology, there are economic considerations, right? There are also dynamic considerations. Okay, that thing was very dynamic in the past. In a certain way, it still is. It's strongly influential. It's part of the character of eastern Wyoming, right? Devil's Tower. Okay, so, the sides of the tower are very steep. That can symbolize inclination, right? Momentum behind that inclination, the massive structural scale of the thing, okay? That's human characterology of a certain kind, right? You could associate it with neurosis. You can associate it with mental disorder. You can associate it with personality disorder. You can also associate it with human health. And there's like a different, shall we say, admixture associated with each of those human conditions, right? If you're neurotic, for example, that is definitely an issue with you on some predictable level. That can be typed out as a characterological type. Now, people argue back and forth over this typology business, right? Some people prefer measures, like the Big Five, as their main indicator for, human typology of a personality psychology scale, right? And Wilhelm Reich's kind of like cast to the side, is too uncomfortable to deal with, right? He brings up a lot of uncomfortable issues. Too much of, modern civilized living is compulsive in nature, in his book, and in my book too, in my view. Based pretty largely on what he, concluded. And Freud, I guess, though Freud is a present study, more of a present study for me. I got pretty deeply into studying Wilhelm Reich in the past, though. Okay, that kind of study has value. And, it's ignored, which should tell you something, okay? That kind of value being ignored. Why exactly? Okay, there's compromise associated with his intelligence networking, sure. There are even cultic properties associated with his situation in, like, Rangeley, Maine, right? And his dealings with people and kind of hoodwinking farmers in the region into paying him money for cloud-busting activities that he precipitated the necessity of himself, in my view. But that's kind of a complex study. You have to study Wilhelm Reich deeply enough to come to that conclusion. In fact, you find out you're told very specifically what conclusions you're allowed to come to when you're dealing with these orgone biophysicists, right? And they'll tell you in no uncertain terms, if you read deeply enough, you say the wrong thing, we'll come after you. We are connected people. network-wise. Not just in the United States, but in Europe, too. And really, it's Eastern Europe, in my view, too. All right, that's the same kind of networking going on out in California when I talk about California network. Okay, so this structural aspect you'd call Devil's Tower can represent then, symbolically, a certain kind of networking, social networking, that I've described as party networking previously, right? Yeah, deep and very obvious and strong enough, obvious enough but strong inclinations that amount to, in kind of a generalized way, even an abstract way, relatively speaking, character structures of a predictable nature associated with, how deeply neurotic somebody might be, or shallowly neurotic, if you're merely what I would call an anxious type, and Wilhelm Reich described as an anxious type, right? Just falling short of being significant because you're trying so hard to avoid all the dangers of the world. Though you could make a big difference if things were handled differently, because you can typically think more clearly than a lot of the compulsive and the impulsive types out there, unless they're starting to dip into their criminal genius. Okay. Also happens to be Devil's Tower in the background, the contextual phallic object in the imagery. Okay, having to do with Capricorn analogy in general. You might call it's a symbolic basis for emotional reactivity. The emotional reactivity belongs to Libra with adjustment and the Empress directly above Capricorn in the secret tree of alchemy, right? So somehow this strong inclination is the basis for this emotional reactivity, or at least the potential for such emotional reactivity in an individual who lacks natural temperance inclinations of a resilient sort, right? So a resilience along tempered lines, emotionally tempered, not so reactive or triggerable necessarily, right? You can hold a natural composure, kind of a social poise that's productive even under stressful circumstances, where you're encountering a stressor. So this devil trump card can be symbolic of encounter with a stressor in life, or an obstacle of some kind. On a characterological level, stressors are experienced often as obstacles or threats even, which gets you back into thinking in terms, like I was discussing before, military identities or military situations that are particularly urgent and threatening, and they appear out of nowhere, right? Capricorn seems to appear out of nowhere. A military operation, revealing itself in operational terms. So, but one of the reasons you use a volcanic mountain like this, it's not only dynamic and economic and associated with the past very strongly, right? Past experience in the present life, humanity's experience dating back through evolutionary and geological time, right? It's kind of a seductive thing, this energy state associated with Capricorn, okay? It seduces the way depression seduces, deceptively even, right? Deception is used in war. The fog of war might seduce you into a really bad situation, right? So, fog of war. The perplexity of war, the conflict, the inner conflict that the situational conflict resonates with strongly. It might make you unstable and confused under stressed circumstances where you're encountering stressors of that nature, right? But the seduction can be very quiet and prolonged through time, protracted through time. You're learning without realizing it, to be in the habit of, say, ruminating very negatively, unproductively about the past over guilt, devaluing yourself, right? Continually ongoing. It seems to kind of like roll along with what you might call a suggestion, right? The mountain over there, Devil's Tower, suggests that you climb it. But maybe, you kind of start to climb it, but then you turn your back on it and don't climb it. But you're there, right? You're with the thing, like the goat is, the personality symbol in the imagery, right? After a while, you start to kind of roll with it, what its suggestions suggest to you. Okay, this thing represents energy stasis, kind of like a manifest slowing down and stopping in life, right? Of enthusiasm beginning to wane and activity waning and slowing down, and an emotional state of, seeming lifelessness and seeming emptiness are associated with it somehow. Somehow, it's affecting a seduction on you that's influencing your behavior, and you're kind of rolling with it. It's almost cultic, right? The way, destructive cults seduce, even Scientology. You're even entertaining yourself, with these ruminations, right? You get a certain kind of satisfaction out of it. That can be kind of part of the seduction, right? The only satisfaction you seem to be getting out of life. And, it's somehow satisfying to just unload on yourself and punish yourself beyond any productive usefulness if you're trying to really get your life rolling on track again, right? For whatever reason, maybe something made you very significantly sad, but you just kept rolling with it and rolling with it and rolling with it into the, protracted time scale of a future beyond events, that depressed you initially. And it starts to become part of your character structure at that point. Maybe you're inclined, again, that word, to entertain such in your life for whatever reason. Could be characterological, could be genetic to a degree. There's the genetic factor to take into account, the human evolution dating back through time and the related family trees factor, twins studies and all that kind of stuff indicating quite a bit of useful information along these lines. So, you're kind of just getting yourself into a morass over time, and the world seems to support it. It seems like the world wants to do you in, right? It seems that way. There's something going on with the world, the environment, right, that just resonates with that idea of just stopping, living or whatever. And maybe you're just tired every day. You think you're tired, you're getting more tired, you want to sleep in more, and you're actually becoming ill maybe eventually, and that contributes to the process, and it captures the base nature of this Capricorn or Saturnine aspect of life on Earth, particularly, right? We experience it as, integral with this living on the surface of the Earth somehow. Some people have tuned into that idea. Wilhelm Reich, for example. I guess Soren Kierkegaard, the sickness unto death, fear and trembling, right? Fear and trembling is kind of an Aquarius thing, and the sickness unto death, that's more of a Capricorn thing, right? Soren, S-O-R-E-N, Kierkegaard, Kierkegaard. My introduction to philosophy in school kind of indicated to me, that this guy's really into existentialism, right? The experience of existence, right? Some people get so caught up in that, they depress themselves, right? Life on Earth. How do you make a good go of life on Earth, right? Maybe this book is useful along those lines, relating information Yeah, Fear and Trembling. Yeah, it's just, this is one of those books that strike me as being alchemically a penetration into an orientation rather than the orientation itself, right? Kind of an obstacle book to read in life. Maybe not for some characterologies to partake of particularly much, right? So, yeah. But that's the nature of, at least that sickness unto death captures Capricorn. And nature is all about getting emotionally reactive relative to that situation. But if nature is free, the emotional reactivity is not that big a deal. Okay, it's actually the life force itself motivating your life, right? But if it's not free, things can change. Why might it not be free? Well, there are plenty of external influences on what might make you not so free, right? And they're pretty easy to tune into, and it's easy to start projecting, blaming, right? Along those lines, without realizing, the self-factor involved, right? That, something within seems to be holding back the life situation, like an obstacle, like I was talking about in the movie The Secret Killer that I was reviewing recently. The Libra character has like a fake eye shield over her left eye. It's like an obstacle. It keeps Libra from seeing across the Zodiac to Aries. Aries symbolizing essentially nothing. Okay, freedom for electromagnetism is it radiates out there into the universe, right? If it can radiate, then there's no problem, right? It's just out there radiating. Your emotions, if they're free to flow, okay, they're not so problematic. They can be very passionate, or appropriately passionate, typically, right? If you're free. If you're characterologically bound up, though, there are going to be issues of emotional reactivity of a triggered nature that many people have come to call woke, which again is a Capricorn word. Capricorn's really only semi-awake, though. So either it's on its way out of conscious awareness and focus, or it's on its way into as though it's just woke. It can be a dangerous time, right? It can even be a violent time with some things. People wake up to things, and then if they're, conditioning themselves culturally into becoming goons, in my view, they become violent and riot. And they think they're demonstrating, and they're holding themselves back. In fact, very often, if they're organized criminally inclined, they do it deliberately so they can profit off of it later. But that's a whole other story of complexities involved with people that are just trying to profiteer while enslaving other people, right? Over time. Building up numbers and all that kind of stuff. And expecting other people not to build numbers because it's racist with those other people building numbers, but they are allowed to build numbers and also entitle themselves, right? So, yeah, hypocrisy is at work very obviously with organized crime and the left wing, more deceptively, including, characterologically, hypocritically with the right wing, the more masochistic wing, in my view. They break down that way emotionally under stress. Okay, it's characterological. Sit down on the sidewalk and cry while people are basically shouting at you and beating you over the head. Kind of a deal. You see it sometimes happen at these stupid demonstrations going back and forth. People are bound up. They're not free. Goldfish bowl freedom is not freedom. Okay. Miss Lieber had a goldfish bowl in her eyeball. It killed her eyeball, you might say. The goldfish doesn't live very long in the goldfish bowl. Goldfish doesn't realize that, though, and it's kind of swimming around, hey, I'm in water. then it's dead. So, yeah, human nature demands a certain kind of freedom. Humans are social animals a certain way. They demand that kind of freedom by nature. We're in the process of being genetically reorganized into something that amounts to the Hindu caste system, which the British are swinging with. You know, the British royalty and all that. They sold out, you know, the white race ages ago, right? All the European royalty were like keen on it, baby. Let's genetically modify people into slave class and police class, and then us class who get to have access to resources, right? The liberal class, the new liberal class, the blue class. They got the blue blood because they got the silverware, you know. You can eat with your hands out in the field while you're digging the field for us. That kind of a deal, right? You're red, we're blue. So, yeah, the right-wingers don't even clue into that at all. For some strange reason, they've been infiltrated, for one thing, and they're not too smart, as they think they are. They can be shallowly, superficially smart, sure. Ranting aside, back to Capricorn here, the nature of it. The nature of this thing, centrally speaking, because it's a centrist orientation, Capricorn, compared with Cancer in regards any toxicity associated with it, right? Here it is like, you know, with tuberculosis in the lungs. It's like a spot of tuberculosis building toxicity, right? Whereas with cancer, the lungs are getting rid of that toxicity out to the periphery, to the circulation, where the liver can deal with it, get rid of it. But with tuberculosis, that system's beginning to break down, right? The cancer aspect is severely threatened by disease, right? Fence and field is threatened by the disease of this stick thing that's worn like bling, you know. It's filled with pus or whatever. Kind of also a phallic object presented to others, right? So, yeah. One around the neck, the groin, whatever, you know, it's flashing gold, five-pointed thing, kind of looking like a goat or whatever. So, yeah, and the underground network is also presenting it. You know, I won't get into the detailed description of what that looks like for this recording's sake, I suppose, but it's in the card. You can see how it's done. It's not just the goat that's presenting it. It's the underground, the goat, shall we say, resonates with. You might call it the dead underground. The already dead Aries, right? The 6 feet underground. Just like the Soviet did a fake fall and then went underground to infiltrate more effectively, basically, on an intelligence level. Communist infiltration is everywhere. I know that sounds like paranoia, but it's true. Might be kind of, you know, shaky these days because the Muslims are catching up. Muslims are not subject to communism. Communists are going to find that out, I'm afraid. Christians, though, are. That's why, communism's designed to come out of Christianity. Christianity is vulnerable a certain way. The masochistic character structure I've talked about in the past versus the sadistic character structure of the Muslim and the communist. That of the communist is derived from the masochism of the Christian. That of the Muslim is characterologically conditioned from birth. Okay. It simply is organized crime and terror. That's the Muslim religion right there. The women are hostages. They've been conditioned to be quite content with that most of the time. Much of the time not, though, justifiably too. But guess what's designed to keep women completely under control? Islam. It's the character structure of Abrahamism at work here. It can be masochistic, it can be sadistic, it can be mafia in the sense of top-down control, intelligence control, Judaism. It can be secular communism, it can be religious, the other branches of Abrahamism, Judaism, Christianity, the Muslim religion, Islam. The world's going crazy. Okay, the slaughter, it's only a matter of time. Guess who suffers it most? The masochists. They get shaken down, cold down, enslaved, murdered. It's what they're designed to initially do to themselves. Okay, self-harm in cultural form. All right. Characterology. Strong inclination, but it's kind of underground. It might show itself in the background contextually compared with the personality presentation, the goat, in the picture. Berkowitz's specific personality would be like the goat. The presentation of John Carr would be much like the goat. And even that of Michael Carr, who doesn't factor as much in the story, but dies a certain way, right? In a state of fear, right? Running away from something, avoiding something, right? Michael Carr being the anxious typology in the book, at the very least. Book probably mirrors reality somehow. Something to take into account. Manny Grossman doesn't agree with it, but we're talking about deeper considerations here that tend to be overlooked. Characterology. Things you're not even aware about yourself, but they represent very strong inclinations, tendencies, momentums of, colossal scope, reaching up into the sky through the Saturnine rings that rule over Saturnine considerations. The ritual comes together in a ring kind of a deal. Saturnine gathering coming together to produce some kind of a depression, which is really tantamount to a murder-suicide. The world will murder the suicidally inclined individual and exploit it. And most people can't face that fact, but it's a fact, in my view. And sometimes it takes ritual form, maybe. I mean, to the degree this Satanism stuff's actually real. Much of it's fiction, obviously, designed to produce a scare. Terrorism, right? So that's something to take into account, because I don't want to contribute to that terroristic aspect of all this satanic stuff, right? But it's something to consider as a possibility, and it maybe leaks into reality through cults of intelligence scope rather carefully and selectively and deceptively, and then disappears again to an underground. That's really just an intelligence underground with political ambitions, right? Maintaining narratives other than specifically satanic narratives, right? The Satanism reveals itself characteristically, right? Along lines, similar to what is symbolized by Devil's Tower, phallically, colossally, but somehow in the history, right? So then we can get into personality presentation. David Berkowitz, John Carr, Michael Carr as three chief characters in the book. Other mysterious characters maybe being nearly entirely fictional, built up in comparison. These are more important characters that possibly were in on the gun action associated with the Son of Sam killings, right? So, according to Mauritari, according to Manny Grossman, no. It's just David Berkowitz, which makes sense and efficiency-wise. But some kinds of assassinations are like small unit military actions, right? Some kind of intelligence operations will be like that, efficiency-wise and operational security-wise even. But some other types require, we need the one guy that gets it done, right? The trigger man. We rely on this guy. If he fails us, we might all fall, right? So, they might have people in the air making sure he does his job. If he doesn't, heads might roll. Depends on the situation they're working with, right? A JFK situation, it's all kinds of stress associated with that. Maybe they got a backup guy there in the form of David Ferrie himself, or maybe David Ferrie somehow put himself in a position to be a trigger man. Relative to Oswald, who was, not realizing that his rifle had been stolen, but I'm not seeing it that way. Based on evidence I've run across, though, and some of the evidence, can I really know that it's real evidence necessarily? It's just my views formulating as a result of the information I've come across. Same with the Son of Sam thing. So I got to reformulate based on new information now. And the same thing's going on with JFK assassination. New information is becoming available, right? So you got to reformulate based on what looks to be pretty real stuff, becoming available online. A lot of work, though, right? Could turn out to be a waste of time. Make sure the information you're putting out has real value at the very least. And you can get to seriously accurate conclusions of value on the situation you're trying to discuss, right? The goal, trying to find out if John Carr really was one of the Sons of Sam, along with Michael Carr. I got to reread Sons of Sam again, Mari Terry's book, The Ultimate Evil. I got to watch all of Manny Grossman's videos and kind of evaluate that situation and weigh them back and forth, right? A lot of the other stuff, is kind of worth taking into consideration, but if I fall short of meeting the goal of revealing specific identities through the process of, identifying operational identities, right? Well, still, the information is going to have a lot of value. Operational identity here, though, is pretty well expressed in that background image of Devil's Tower, right? It's like a military identity, right? Identities work best under operationally defined circumstances where you define parameters and various forms of what you might call logistical modalities of support and fire support modalities of support and reinforcement modalities of support and what have you, like, with mathematical identities, a lot of them only work with natural numbers, but not the entire set of whole numbers. So 0 doesn't work with a lot of them. You can't use 0 in that function there and call it an identity anymore. It doesn't work properly. The number 1, though, you plug it in for x, f of x or whatever, and you can put your little dot on your graph, and it's usefully expressive of something, right? And you go on to the next, number you plug into the variable and put another dot up there, and you got a line running through it expressing something that shows a relationship that, can take place in nature. Especially if you actually, take measures in nature that are accurate and applicable to that particular function, right? So combat is kind of the same thing. You need these resources on hand. You need, have to have established for yourself an initiative of some kind. You seized the day and now you have an initiative to take advantage of for a window of opportunity worth of time. What resources do we have available right now? Where do those resources need to go? Intelligence operations, the same basic idea. Something needs to be initiated timely here and effectively. So, and you initiate things on your terms, not the enemy's terms, and you best know the enemy's terms, right? You keep the enemy on his or her heels, so to speak, right? You are the master of the chaos because you're not caught up in a chaotic state. So, this is what we're discussing here is a chaotic state that can be very seductive, man. I just want to sleep all day, right? I really feel it on an emotional level, right? Just sleep the life away. Things get worse over time. Those kinds of momentums building up, right? It's somehow satisfying to just kind of roll along with them, right? That's kind of the way these energies here work. Okay, you're rolling with them. This is the energy of stasis, manifest stasis. Something is either stopping here or it's starting. If it's starting, then you could call it woke. That's still a dangerous time. Waking up might be a dangerous time for you sometimes in the morning. You might be particularly grumpy, right? Stub your toe or whatever, I don't know. So, that foot just wants a kick for some reason. So now I've got a bruised toe or whatever. But that aside, this is kind of, relatively speaking, centrist, though. So instead of being fence and field, peripheral, okay, this is central and kind of a bone worn around a necklace, kind of a bling kind of a thing. It's kind of phallic looking, like a femur bone or something wearing around your neck. Symbolic. It can stir people into a certain kind of awareness. It's supposed to be representative of something, right? It's kind of mysterious. It's enigmatic, like this individual here, personality that I'm presented with. With personality, one of the things you're dealing with that perplexes things, compared with characterology, are what are known as individual differences, which can be many and varied. They depend a lot on cultural background, personal history background, which are all points of interest in psychology. Same as in medicine, really. Much the same, anyway. But they're particularly important in psychology because symptomatology is very important. And, it's in medicine, but also psychology. What people tell you is very important, right? But you're dealing with a personality. There are differences between people personality-wise to sort through. You're trying to get at, some manner of diagnosis, right? If you're a clinician. Things tend to be predictable along those lines and nossologically, chronicled predictably. That's where you're trying to hopefully arrive at, something you can deal with treatment-wise. Come up with a treatment plan together with your patient here. So, you're sorting through individual differences, and they can be way sophisticated. This is like a fashion statement standing in front of you, right? But it's also got signs you can kind of clue in on. Tonality of voice, for example. Yeah, it's unique, but it's also characteristic. You're starting to clue in on some things. Characterological. Usually that can indicate some manner of strong inclination as symbolized by Crowley, right? In the background there, contextual. Part of the past history of this individual, experience-wise in life. This person's experienced things. Okay, these are significant things, especially to this person that's relating these ideas to you, right? This is a care situation developing, even in the social inclusion of, somebody, you allow into your office to sit down with you and discuss their issues, right? That social inclusion's automatically formulating a care situation. You're together in care as far as nature is concerned, right? Some people kind of unload a lot of emotion even right away under those circumstances as a result of that. Kind of let things flow out a bit and then kind of hold it back again. Maybe they're not so full of trust just yet, but they have a need to trust the clinician, right? With their raw feelings or whatever. They're distressed, for example. And the family's distress that they have to deal with every day. Relationships and all that kind of stuff. Work relationships and all the complexities that go into building an individual personality and its presentation to you, right? That's that goat. There's a certain amount of what you might call sinister quality in the overall image of that card, right? You got to be careful to manage that appropriately. because you need the person to open up honestly with you, right? The trust has to be something you naturally are inclined to foster with people that you're interviewing, right? You work to, build a certain amount of trustworthiness into your own life, right? Just as a daily practice, as part of your professional practice as a clinician too, right? So, you're having an initial counter, even though it's a clinical care situation kind of a thing, this devil trump card kind of applies to that situation. When you're dealing with the possibility of mental disorder, this is kind of what you're dealing with overall, the imagery in this card. This card is particularly psychological, and it is depth psychological. It is also personality psychological, and dealing with all the sophisticated complexities associated with that. You're looking at histories at work here, the histories of peoples, the history of an individual, the history of a community that surrounds this individual, right? And their influence on this individual. So that's the go. So you got to be careful to respect the client, patient, person, and not, come off acting like they're just the weirdo that showed up in your life, which is easy to do today if you're not, an appropriately conditioned clinician who's practiced very appropriately a craft, an art, really, Bachelor of Arts degree in psychology kind of a deal. These are arts. The sharing of information is associated with this. Personal information of confidential scope, typically, right? People want to put together for themselves a really good footing in the world, and to do that, you got to be able to put a best foot forward effectively under socially harmonious circumstances and be with other people, right? You don't necessarily want everybody knowing your secrets, so you're a therapist. You can hold confidence with these people, and you're obviously competent, and that helps build trust, right? And because you're competent, you're more confident, and that comes across to people, and they feel they can maybe rely on you, right? Over time, they might feel that way. It depends on the individual character structures involved. Some character structures, even though they're clearly ill in my view, just would never be in a clinical circumstance. And they're not necessarily so ill, they're harmful to people, as much as maybe harmful in their own lives. Or they're kind of a drag on other people because of it, and you gotta kind of learn to live with them being that way. I've had to learn to live with my own inclinations along those lines, but today things are just coming to a head so much, right? People are starting to just fall out of sorts. And these are dangerous times, in my view. What people have called interesting times, okay? Change isn't always for the better, but it's kind of an inevitability, right? But some things effectively don't really change, though people think they do and they want to believe as much. And that's something to watch out for too, because those people are headhunters just as sure as the other group is, right? So dealing with all this headhunting going on in the world just compounds things. You want to be a better person. The world doesn't seem to be moving in that direction. So you've got to learn how to very sensibly swim against that current, right? That seems to want to sweep people out into the ocean. That ocean being pure oblivion, death 6 feet under, right? Pure darkness down there somewhere. It seduces people out into, with this riptide activity, they might want to decide they want to just, let themselves disappear into an oblivion, right? This, the sirens are out there even getting to kind of seductively, emotionally reactive, it's like, oh, we're out here, come crash against the rocks, and blah, blah, blah. All these old stories from ancient Greece or whatever. The heroic Greeks, tying themselves to the mast of their ships and stuffing things into their ears and like, I'll not be seduced into oblivion by you sirens. These would be like Capricorn dominated Libra, Gemini spirits, seducing, whispering, come hither. It's satisfying here against these rocks. So, yeah, these stories have a validity to them, a pretty powerful one that reflects, surprisingly directly on this whole concept of, hyper inclination that can be associated with character structure, to varying degrees with individuals, of course. But with humanity overall, there's significant inclination there. It even leaks into the, healthy human character structure. It's as though we've evolved to have to deal with a certain reality on this planet and experience a certain amount of pain as a result and be resilient in the face of it with strengths to support continued life, continued social life, continued engagement in everyday reality and development on an individual scale, on a social scale, okay? Personality. So with the personality thing here, there's that presentation that takes place. It's not entirely different from a clinical presentation, but you'd call it here a kind of party presentation taking place. We met David Berkowitz at some kind of a party outside of Police Center 1 in downtown Manhattan, right? He's revealing a specific personality at that point, and certain inclinations implied in his behavior. They're dark. They're getting a kind of a satisfaction out of it, as though something's coming to a head that's been developing for a long time. You can kind of sense it with him. I think he's still involved in the same operation to this day, right? That's my view on the subject. He's not just some sick perp that came along, but, when you're running an intelligence operation like this, you're not going to just grab some guy off the street and say, well, now you're our perp. Now you're going to develop the perp. Okay, you're going to develop the profile of this individual. You're going to know that this profile is already developed from the nature of this individual's background, where he came from, right? Perfect, for the profile. More perfect than John Carr, probably, who's more, somebody that might try to rob a bank. Somebody like Berkowitz, though, it's a process, a cold-blooded, systematically, executed process, in comparison at least, right? He does things a certain way. That makes him more ideal, probably, as the fall guy, the patsy, as they like to say. You can be a patsy and a murderer. Or, the only guy pulling the trigger and still a patsy, right? But can you prove it? Well, if you're going to take things to court, you have to. But people need to be able to think beyond that if you're going to compete with intelligence, networks, and agencies in this world, okay, for your freedom. Okay, you have to compete on that scale. You have to think better than they think. Not just what they think, you have to be better than they are. Most people right now just aren't. Why do you want to swing with aborting your own life, right? It's defeat. Okay, masochism is defeat. It's giving up. Okay, I give up to death. So that's the Christian world. That's the Western world. Things come to a head at some point. They become obvious. Certain things reveal themselves in what you might call goat fashion. Okay, suddenly it's there. You have to deal with this personality, right? That has not developed itself outside of the context of terrorism and crime pretty largely. I over-idealize things and simplify things, you could argue, but crime is crime. Real crime is real crime. Okay. You can be accused otherwise, even though you've mostly kept yourself separate from crime in life. Most people are criminals to some small degree. just based on what you believe and what you impose on other people at the very least. So, yeah, can you live with what you've done in life by the time you're dead? That's an important question. What do you truly regret by the time you're dead? So, criminal types don't regret anything. They get a lot of satisfaction out of terrorizing people. That's what criminality is all about when you come right down to it. Reality control, mind control. Okay, the communist world is a criminal world. So is the Muslim world. So too is the Christian world. Okay, superficially it does probably the best job of maintaining appearances otherwise. Those are goldfish bowl reality appearances. Okay, that's a reality bubble that's going to kill you. Okay, it's a compulsive substitute for genuine reality. It's like a plank in your eye that you maintain because it makes you feel comfortable somehow, until it kills you. Yeah, I don't trust any religion taking place. This Hindu stuff is turning up in England and Germany through Islam. All right? This caste system that's coming online. It's going to enslave people if people don't do anything about it. This thing with AI, that's just a destructive tool. Chaos. They're going to kill a lot of people with AI, drones and what have you. They're going to be, your son or daughter might be chased down a dirt road with a drone, just as we've seen done recently during the COVID years. People forget about these things too. But it was done experimentally. They can't wait for the day when they're just going to be chasing people to their deaths. And, you don't have a rifle in your hand, but you said something that somebody wants gotten rid of. The assassination takes place with a drone. It's more effective than any mafia hitman ever dreamed of being, right? Up close and personal even, and on video. Sick, right? Personalities are going to develop out of that. Okay. So, we've taken into account in this situation Berkowitz, John Carr, Michael Carr, personalities, right? They're going to present as personalities as characters in a story. Okay, characters are always generalized at least a little bit. Some abstractions in there, that appeal to people and they empower the character, right? But central in this would be, of course, David Berkowitz, who's empowered even with his presence being led up to interrogation when he was arrested, right? It's kind of a dark glow about the guy almost, right? The weird videotape of the day somehow capturing it. The times. It's as though it was rehearsed or something, but that's just me remembering it probably out of fully realistic sense context, I guess you could say. If I were actually to watch the video all over again, I'd probably be all kind of a bit bored with it. But that's how it struck me when I first saw it. And it still cut that, impression still sticks with me. Then we got bling factor here. And I got to get this idea down clearly this time. Persona. Jung is a good source of information studying persona. Okay. It's natural to engage in these kind of activities. Persona presentation, part of putting your best foot forward. Some occasions you show up in a double-breasted suit. Others, it's a business daytime suit of appropriate scale and scope for the type of work you do. And other times you're in, sociable and casual clothes, right? It's the presentation factor. You're presenting yourself as a personality and associating yourself with things you identify with, sometimes brand names, right? Sometimes associations with organizations. It shows on your jewelry. It can become a conversation piece between you and somebody else. There's all kinds of different expressions along these lines in society, and some of them are considered, not to be fully appropriate, but it really depends on your perspective, social situation-wise and all that. People are kind of overhyped up about those issues these days. And they're too worried about library books, for one thing, that have sexual stuff in them. They don't want their culturally conditioned kids to access those books. Yeah, but your kid's inadequately prepared to survive into the future. Why exactly? Why is your kid going to be a slave exactly? Part of it's your fault and your library's fault. The book's probably just another, relatively worthless read anyway. We could focus on more important issues than, there was a sexual act in the book found in the library that my 8th grade kid accessed and read. In his own personal life, he has to develop his own personal resilience. If he can be socially, accessible in life to people and have access to, sensible social contacts, peers under, relatively safe circumstances, things can sort themselves out. He can learn real lessons, learning lessons associated with socializing with other people. That used to be kind of done, as a matter of course, back in the 60s and earlier, right? Kids dress up and go to parties with each other and they socialize and they start to interact under those safe circumstances, right? It's social opportunity to learn on that level. You learn through experience what truly is or isn't repulsive, for example. You can be brought up in this world thoroughly repulsive without even realizing it. Completely repulsive. Some people are crippled that way in life. We get back to this whole bling thing, right? It's phallic shaft shape, magic wand, looks like a lead pipe even. It's got kind of a toxic quality to it. It's right in the middle of things, right in the center of things, presentation-wise. It's in the movie, the Sharon Tate movie, I forget the name of it, 1966 black and white movie. She wears bling like that. It almost seems to resonate as seduction, right? She represents an emotional reactivity of a seductive sort along those lines that puts the little kids on the edge of maybe falling off the castle to their deaths. She actually gets beat over the issue by someone. The repression of the masochism of it, right? The repression of it that develops from that. The suppression, bringing the repression over time. The conditioning of it is part of her characterology as a Libra symbol and a Gemini symbol, right? The witchy woman in the movie. I forget the name of that movie offhand. It actually turns out to be an interesting, really dark movie about human sacrifice. But this guy basically walks into his own death like it's an inevitability. He's been conditioned to it all his life. His son's going to be conditioned into it. It's cultic. It's seductive. She's like the seductive symbolism in it. And the brother, a Scorpio symbol, is the executioner with the arrows. He practices the art of killing. Okay, he's like the sadistic element. She's like a masochistic element, being beaten and, kind of subservient in her own way, right? Sharon Tate playing that role prior to becoming a caretaker of a certain individual, JSK, right? A conditioning, something very deeply dark conditioned into somebody. A Christianization of someone, really effectively. You're born again, like a Christian, a fool, not remembering contexts that are very important and are valued by a certain class of people that are what you'd call vampire people, right? Cannibals of a sort who practice those arts. Because they represent momentums and they're associated with transcenduction and seduction along those lines. The evil eye or whatever. The ability to use suggestion even with your eyes, your voice, the way you pace things. And these people practice these things It's not a practice I've much bothered with up to this point. I'm still trying to orient myself on what is appropriate practice for my own purposes, so that I'm not trying to persuade as much as control my own suggestibility, right? That's what I value in this situation of developing not persuasive tendencies, but not seductive tendencies, but resilient tendencies, right? Suggestion doesn't have to work on me so much, but, you know, they work on people with suggestion. JSK, for example, hit with it hard, apparently. Very suggestible individual as a result. Practiced at doing as told, I guess you could say, along those lines. Conditioned that way. You see the imagery of it kind of in a movie like Serenity, right? The girl that's released from experimental captivity. She's experienced a lot of weird stuff, right? Traumatized individual. She's more of a fully aware character, though, of having been traumatized. Comparatively speaking, some kind of weird MK Ultra thing going on there that's kind of TV fictional. A lot of fiction written about that kind of stuff, too. But there's some validity to it, but I don't think they've been all that successful with it. If JSK represents some kind of a success, it's like, well, it's not that impressive what they did. They plan on using the information on a larger scale, though. That's been in the sinks. Large-scale social influence, terroristic, right? Son of Sam. Because they keep showing JSK as a son of Sam, as a Zodiac killer, as a Manson Family killer, as... You know, they make these characters so they can dump all these negative memories into his nature through these vampiric methods, out-of-body vampirism. It's a variation on that whole theme I talked about of Saturnine coming together. It's of a depressive nature. It dumps negative waste energies onto a target, right? Eventually, you know, it kills the target. You have to hold a psychological resilience up in the face of it and a strength related to just to hold the line as far as being, you know, a normal, everyday, decent person is concerned. Never fully characterologically healthy. You're just being bombarded, right? So you hold the line and you're going to die without ever murdering anyone. That's the whole point of living on a certain level, right? You're never going to murder anyone. That, you know, if that's part of their plan, right? You're supposed to turn into some kind of, you know, murderous freak rather than just an everyday kind of geeky, nerdy freak or whatever. Die without regretting having lived in the end. Okay, you can live with how you've lived now that you're going to die. So, the bling thing. Presentation, right? It's not just a presentation on the part of the personality presenting it. There's a background context presenting that particular presentation. It's a toxin for all intents and purposes. It's as though, you know, they're bringing a capsule of virus across the ocean, right, and releasing it. Or releasing it in their own country, knowing they can handle the situation a bit more effectively than you. Simply because they're going to bring outright tyranny and... effectively, what they do is impose herd immunity on people. Okay, they don't bother with masks much. Okay, that's actually counterproductive. Okay, you're putting a concentration of bacteria right up on your face all the time. Under those circumstances, it's ill-advised. You want fresh air, you want sunlight, you want healthy nutrition, right? They probably got people over there, you know, just experiencing, you know, tyranny conditioning for one thing, but that's about all it amounts to. They're just going to have herd immunity together. And they're going to organize things and deal with the emergency of it more organized, you know, than other countries. Other countries are going to be the stupid countries. The Western countries are going to accept the poisons into their lives. The so-called vaccine, it's actually a poison. You know, that little bling thing can represent just that sort of thing. take the injection. Okay? It's a seduction. Come and die with us. With us, the brand. The brand name that brings you the expensive stuff that really basically just poisons you to death. Every once in a while, sure, there's a good pharmaceutical out there, but if it's not patented by us, it's going to become illegal. We're the cartel in charge now. That's the kind of presentation that's going on with this card. So, as far as David Berkowitz is concerned, what are we dealing with there? Well, he comes up on the car, according to Manny Grossman, kind of smiling, a smile. You know, that's part of his MO. Apparently that's being, you know, it's coming to revelation lately, right? And he's presenting you with something. Bang, bang, bang. Maybe you're dead. It's a .44 caliber revolver. So it's a piece of bling, you know, considered on a certain level, right? Like that little shaft thing. The goat is maybe giving you the shaft somehow. Maybe not. It's an enigma. Personality is rather enigmatic, right? That's why people like other people with personality, you know. Even if you're dealing with compromise, personality goes a long way. It can result in quite a nice, illuminative evening of conversation, which is always good, right? You know how to act. So if this other guy knows how to act, that's good enough for now. And he's wearing this bling thing around his chest. It seems to be like an ankh or something like that, or an up-down, side-down star. Knows what they might be wearing, right? So, no big deal right now, right? It's a party. We're just talking here, right? It's fun. Now, as far as these other activities like supposedly go on at these goat parties, there are indications that at least a good portion of it's fake. It's fiction being written into the lore, right? There are other indications that something's going on there, possibly involving kidnapped children, which is a total bummer, right? But JSK happens to be one of these kidnapped children, right? And Sinks just consistently reveal it again and again and again and again. A very significant one simply because he's a prototype, okay, of mind control. So this supposedly is becoming a larger issue on a social scale in our time, right? So naturally it has to be reported. That's the only reason I'm making these recordings, right? Yeah, it has to be reported. Like any organized crime is reported to the people. If you're a responsible person, man, you don't worry about being labeled a rat. Okay, you know who the real rats are. Okay, they're the cowards that can't face reality and fess up when needs to be fessed up. Not what people want necessarily to get satisfaction, right? Now, they need to hear certain things. That's what you make sure they have. They need to hear this. All right? So, this thing with JSK, all I can say it's as true as I can make it. Without accessing the memories. And I'm using these things and they work. The Secretary of Alchemy works. So these things I'm talking about with JSK, somehow they're going to translate it over to a larger scale. Gaining control over people. It amounts to turning somebody into a slave. Okay? A kind of fool at the same time. That's part of the demonization process. You're demonized down, you know, to a status level, you know, person-wise that amounts to, in the end, at decisive times, what's left over and survives is slavery for your race. All right? It's not necessarily the race you would expect based on history. Okay? There's been a lot of weird things going on with slavery on this planet. In the end, it's designed to enslave, in my view, the white race. But, you know, if they are allowed to survive at all. It seems like it's been in the works for at least 6,000 years. So you resist it all kinds of ways, you know. You're going to keep your cultic mind truly alive. Social inclusion is an act of care that somehow produces value in the world. Somehow maybe people change in a more positive direction, and if there's anything going on with them risky at all, if you live in a world without risk, you're kind of isolating yourself. So, their bling presentation maybe passes right over your head, and you're just caught up in the illumination of social experience at a party situation. The lights at the party kind of, enhancing the overall effect. And, this party archetype can be used so many different ways to include in the media when you meet somebody like David Berkowitz for the first time. Very significant event, right? There's an illumination around it, right? It's dark, though. It's associated with terror. Relative terror, you might say. Fascination on another level with people. They're fascinated, they're terrorized at the same time. Fascination is a transformative influence on people. Okay, you're transforming something within your nature. When you're fascinated with something, you're focused on it. It's meditative, it's trance-inducing to a degree, maybe perceptibly so, maybe not. You're just engrossed. You are changing as a person when you're fascinated with something, all right? So maybe usually on a small level, the bling can become a point of fascination, like in the movie, the Sharon Tate movie. It's got a vibe to it, right? Somehow it's dark, though. Saturnine. It's kind of sad. It seduces, and you might step over the cliff and die, like falling off of Devil's Tower or something, rather than a castle toying around up on the roof. Children, oh my God, thinking back on childhood, the risks children take sometimes just can be so incredibly insane. As an adult, I think back and I think to myself, it's amazing I'm alive today. You're like testing some kind of limit you don't even understand. You could die from this. Other people could be injured by this even. If you were thoughtful, in terms of what you're getting yourself caught up in or something, right? Lack of thoughtfulness can kill a child. Okay? It's as though maybe a calling called little JSK to walk out into the Alaskan woods, right? And that even shows up in the sync. Some voice called him out there. He's walking out there. He's walking and walking and walking out into the Alaskan wilderness, for crying out loud, right? I suppose I should get into the actual sequences of events I'm discussing here, because I was kind of messing up with Manson on the last presentation, right? Yeah. Okay, getting this thing straight with how things went down when JSK was raped. I'm beginning to realize, and the syncs are indicating as much too, kind of in my face, things should have been obvious. The housekeeper needed to be taken into consideration as something other than just background. Kind of somebody who passes through and, she's somebody that's there all day, for crying out loud. Dealing with probably the infant child, boo-boos on the knee or whatever, right? That kind of a deal. Kid goes to the kitchen crying or whatever for help with something. So, guess who's there much of the time? Guess who's drunk over in the pool with the champagne case? Guess who's on drugs in the living room, right? But guess who's not on drugs? Somebody's on duty that actually has to deal with the kid. The kid's supposed to be in the backyard, not the front yard, but, if you're a sober individual, how do you deal with that? I'm not sure how they managed that at all. It seems like JSK had to kind of, at night, sneak his way around front just to get a good look at Los Angeles and whatever, and Hollywood Boulevard, right? The events of that day, were probably registered by the housekeeper, and that's how the information got into the network. They're just not paying enough attention to the housekeeper. they're on drugs and they're boozing up and partying up, hanging out all day and on the phone talking to friends and just enjoying the lifestyle up there, right? So this kid's kind of a, boat anchor up there to a degree. They got to watch the kid. They don't like him. I suppose they've totally freaked the kid out over time. So his parents don't like him when he gets back home. Their cool kid has been ruined, so to speak. Just utterly ruined as an individual. Just not pleasant to be around as a kid. He's a disaster, all right? In cruel terms, I guess you could say, right? But they disasterify. They just ruin people. That's what they like to do. This Saturnine influence, right? You're making a devil, a Satan. Okay, Satan is Saturnine. It's depressing. It's a drag, for crying out loud. This kid's a drag. Okay, he's not right. He's not natural. He's not something you want to necessarily care for. All right, by nature, you might feel sorry for him. But, you get a sense the kid's as good as dead. Right? So nature's like, well, that's not going to be the case. But that's resilience that needs to be built up over time. Strengths, developments, and all that other stuff. Hard lessons, unfortunately, too. So nature manages things better. Humanity does a really lousy, rotten job of it, in my view, compared with nature. Nature's watching your back. Okay? Make no mistake about it. There's something in this universe that's here with you, for you. All right? Because I tell you what, people can be so rotten. And just, they mismanage things. Because they're characterologically, most people are messed up. They really are. They're a lot like this kid is like an ideal version of what humanity has become or something. But he's an infant, for crying out loud. You can't fault an infant that much, or a very young child. Nature is behind them in life very strongly. And the care factor channels through you as an older person along those lines, right, by nature. So how that plays out here is hard to say. Okay, nature wants you to fall in love with the young people so you can care for them and raise them, bring them into the world, introduce them into the world, right? That's evolved into humanity. Okay, we're social beings. We're social with infants and children, right? There's a certain characteristic way that tends to work out by nature, right? It's easy to tune into. It's part of your genetic code. Okay, it's part of what allowed us to survive up to this point. To go against that nature is just horrible, right? Just terrible. Oh, wow. Catastrophe for humanity, right? You start developing all these weird cults, right? Amount to reality control, mind control of a tyrannous nature, thought reform, and all that nonsense. Reforming oneself on free terms works better if you can somehow tune into it and just get it rolling. Just do it. You keep it rolling, by the way. A poison's going to kill you at some point, but you keep it rolling till the end. And nature will carry you through. So, getting back to what I got sidetracked from here. So at night, the kid, the things are revealing, he's got to kind of sneak around front, maybe sit outside Sharon Tate's door by the pool there. Maybe capture some warmth from inside the house, some sounds of, infants love to listen to adults talk. It's almost like music in their ears. They love to listen to that talking going on. It's reassuring to them. They feel safe to even drift off to sleep, right? That kind of a deal. You remember that from early childhood. how soothing it is. You know, listening to older people, even older young people, talking, chattering, having fun, jumping up and down in the yard exuberantly, and, you know, playing games, pretend games and stuff. When you're very young, that's all fascinating to you. And it stays fascinating to you even when you get older. It's like nature's music of sociability in life, right? So you kind of go over to the guest house, and you're out there by that window, picture window, kind of laying low, and just look out at Los Angeles, Hollywood Boulevard down there, and the cars and the lights, and there's, I guess you might even be able to see people down there, who knows? And you're up there totally alone, and there's a wonder to it all, like a fascination building up within you, supporting you, you know. Because JSK held on to these kind of emotional tendencies all of his life. He could be like thoroughly alone in the middle of Europe, in Bavaria, walking around Old Town Wurzburg, just completely alone and just reveling in it that way. You know, he's actually getting nostalgic about things, homesick. It's like a mood thing coming over him. He's seen a lot of this stuff before somehow, but he doesn't know it. And it brings back, you know, emotions of youth. And you can revel in it, and yet you're homesick somehow. You want to go home. It's so terrible. And at the same time, it's the magic of youth, right? They kind of wind up programming that into this fool reborn thing, right? But on rape day, it would seem like, you know, the housekeeper was the leaker that leaked to the network what went on. And confidences were not kept. Basically, she probably leaked to her network, which would be something akin to the Black Panthers, right? Playing kind of a background BLM role kind of a deal, right? Some kind of level 4 operative at that level of networking, compared with Antifa folk here all on drugs and drinking out at the pool and on the phone all day. Supposedly watching the kid. The kid's supposed to be in the backyard, stay back there, you know. But there's, you know, the backyards are going to be interesting for a while, you know. It's kind of like the Swiss Alps, as revealed when you look at the Brady Bunch movie, you know. Get Back on the Box, Swiss Miss Box or something like that. That's that hill going up behind the house. It's like the Swiss Alps. If you've been to Europe and seen the Alps, they just seem to just go right up into the air out of the ground, right? It's pretty amazing to look at on a really nice day, clouds just, you know, rolling through. And it's late spring, early summer or whatever, and you got that kind of a warm breeze in the air, and it's like right out of the movie 1966, I forget it, Sound of Music, almost. Maybe a little bit more warm, breezy because of the season or whatever, but it can be like that in the Alps. The Rockies have their own character, but it's really old and kind of in the process of eroding out of existence in comparison with the Alps, which are still building themselves, right? So you can be climbing up there on them fresh rocks, those, you know, climbing around, scrambling around up there, looking out off into the distance, having, you know, gone up there from your sleep quarters lodge, place where they got you kind of camped out, right? And, you know, you're sleeping in a room with like 20 guys, and they're like right next to each other, and you're like carefully rolling over not to touch anybody accidentally. It's strange. Interesting, but strange. You know, the Bavarian Alps, you know, Germans up there, they climbing parties, climbing in the mountains. Mood reveals, you know, it's the Libra thing. It's kind of an emotional reactivity. It's more of a mood thing, though. Overtakes you that way. sweeps over you, right? Comes and goes that way. Like fog rolling through, It's, oh man, that's fabulous fog, and then it's gone. What was that all about? And of course, it takes decades, to arrive at any kind of sensible answers, right? The nature of the beast built, like AI, it's got a characterology, a personality sometimes, and a presentation, brand name stamped on the shoulder that's about to put a bullet in you, or some crap like that going on with the way they're programming things now, right? Robots and drones, maybe hunting people. That's pretty scary to me. Like a Zodiac killer running around killing people, terrorizing people. That kind of killing. Only, robots and drones. So, yeah, it's this whole thing with, Steve Parent and the other guard in the guest house, this kind of silly thinking, This is where you're jumping around courses of action. And you're not very well practiced at it compared with some people that are seriously good at that kind of stuff, right? Zeroing in on things, right? You got to sleep on it, right? Oh, yeah, I forgot about her. Yeah, the leaking point. Suddenly the network is aware of certain things that went on up at the house. They involve the kid. You're not supposed to do certain things with a kid. The kid is handled a certain way. The trauma has pretty largely already been done. He's being weaned off of everything and getting ready to transition back to Maine, right? And then this happens. Some drug-addled. It's looking to me like maybe not so much on the couch as over by the front door. Because they keep placing things a certain characteristic way by that door, right? The event happened in that area somehow. As though getting at the kid and punishing the kid that way there. Because rapes can be just horridly boring. Torrid that way, though. Just violent, right? They happen pretty quickly. Not what the infant's accustomed to at all, whatever exactly it turned out to be. Weird pictures are showing up in the sinks along those lines, right? The Visitor and what have you, I've posted lately. Yeah, but the network knows about it. So guess what happens? The Manson murder night happens. So it's really a simple matter. Okay, the inside people, 2 of them, live there. Sharon Tate. And then much of the time, Jay Sebring's up there for whatever reason as in my view, CIA presence. But that's because I've seen in other sinks, that guy on the telephone pole in the Brady Bunch movie messing around with the electrical wires and throwing them on the ground and telling the kid, just make sure nobody touches this wire or something like that. Just, so the kid doesn't know anything about what's going on, maybe. Who knows? But, kid likes to bounce the red ball around. It's a toy. Apparently with the dog bouncing around is kind of a thing going on. And the dog's keen on that kind of gameplay with the ball, too. So, yeah. Maybe the kid likes to come around the front yard at night because the kid realizes he can get away with being out there, right? Bounce the red ball around, and then somebody yells out the window, get back in the backyard or something, and then he just kind of gets in the habit of sneaking around to the sides, hanging around the front of the garage or whatever, and just kind of marveling at things in the night. Around the other side by the swimming pool, down by the guest house, out of view, safe and sound. Yeah, kid playing, testing limits, right? So, learning how to be sneaky, though, too. Which, probably feeds into their program to a degree. They know ahead of time he's going to do it, but you don't exactly have the most sophisticated parents in charge of the kid at this point. They're just supposed to watch the kid, make sure the kid doesn't disappear or die. Ongoing experiment, you don't need to know too much about it other than your involvements in the past hinted at in sinks. Right, Abigail Folger being one of the menstruating women, passed through the JSK situation on video. So, according to a sync, I don't know if I published it or not. I'm pretty sure I did. But the scene comes to mind, but the movie doesn't. The hand passing through some kind of a garrote string thing that I watched recently, or in conjunction with certain synced information. And, the Capricorn presentation has to be even better than this, because it's very psychological. Like I said, depth psychological. Also related to the other kinds of psychological fields, right? They're all value fields, by the way. I don't knock any of them down. But I've noticed that, if you focus too much on one field, it might be because you're specializing very effectively as a therapist or clinician or experimenter or whatever. But mind control people do that too. They like certain things that amount to control over people, right? The entire range of fields associated with psychology is like a kind of freedom, because it's some of the best information you can ever run across anywhere, still to this day. They've undermined engineering recently just by effectively eradicating it from the country, right? But they still need engineers. That's another field that's just totally fascinating to me. Mathematics is coming online that way simply because of the reliability of it, how it works as a reflection of relationships in nature. But some people take a pure logic, purist mathematical approach to it too, which turns out to be valid on its own terms, right? They turn out to be some of the best math teachers, being into understanding mathematics itself, right? So all three of these things are identities along the lines I've been discussing. But this bling thing represents, consciously held identification. An identification taking place on the part of the wearer, but maybe also on the part of the person looking at the item for the first time. Sharon Tate's bling she wears in the movie. As soon as you see it, man, it's almost hypnotic. There's an identification associated with that. It happens automatically. They rely on that to a certain degree. It's part of the suggestion going on, right? Identify with me. Be suggestively open to me. I am suggesting something to you at the same time. I'm presenting something to you in obvious terms. That kind of keeps you distracted, but also focused. Around that focus, there's trance induction going on, mirror neurons. She, being a fashionable presentation, represents behavioral modeling of some kind, too. Just to know the way she sits there or acts or just, is in repose, seducing, people to step over a cliff or whatever. I seduce you to climb this mountain and then abort at some point, right? Kind of a deal like with Devil's Tower. So you're relating to something at the same time. Object relations, that's a nice little pendant you got there. You kind of relate to us going, it's golden and everything. It's got that design on there. But there's an identification associated with it that you can tune into. And on an emotional level, you're going to do that right away, right along with that trance induction that seems to be emanating from the thing, right? And the way she uses her voice and soothes you off a cliff, or soothes a young boy to walk out into the woods. Okay, somebody else could wind up injured from that. Child doesn't think as much. That could ever happen. Child's just adventuring, right? These people have been speculating on the motivation behind walking out in the woods like that off and on for half a century now. Just over half a century, kind of laughing at it a little bit. He must have heard a voice that, beckoned him out into the woods. And, for the longest time you're perplexed. Why would that be the case? Well, this is the case. They're talking about Saturnine coming together, taking place. It's almost whirling over your head, like ravens or whatever up there, or blackbirds, or what's the other term? The murder birds, the murder that shows up at some point, right? Anyway, the ravens are more of a depressive thing, right? The depression building and looming evermore kind of a deal, and acting as an ever-present seduction of a sort. You can't help but pay attention to that thing at some point. How do you deal with that? It seems to be ever-present, right? Well, you don't want to give in and just die. Life can be so grand, right? So, but it does have its seduction, right? Drawing people in. This is what these people toy around with quite a bit conceptually. So, identification. And this is identification associated with an underground pictured in the tarot card. So this underground network would be something communicated grapevine-wise regarding the situation in JSK sometime, probably late July, early August. An event takes place. It's a bad idea event. It could ruin the entire operation, right? So what happens? Murder night happens. Sharon Tate and J.C. Bring arrive back after Sharon Tate took her Porsche out of the place earlier in that day, on the 8th, I guess, of August. Comes back with J.C. Bring his black Porsche. They've got 2 trunks with them full of Sharon Tate's winter clothes. She leaves them out front, where in the general area where the rape must have taken place, because they keep throwing Capricorn stuff in that area, right? And they got the knife in the chair, kind of maybe suggesting something off in that direction, maybe. It's hard to say unless you really know the layout of the house, right? Where something happened really negative. I mean, like something like a rape can be so relatively quick and just repulsive, right? It's repelling, repulsive experience. Real traumatic, I guess. Results in, cramping taking place in the anus for life under certain circumstances, right? It's a characterological problem for life, but it's a relatively minor one that somehow never really gels into a remembering of anything, right? It's associated with probably helping him forget. It's a distraction, the pain of it, the muscle cramp that goes on in the colon area, right? It's its own kind of distraction, something to focus on. Why is that happening again? Why is that happening? You don't know, do you? But it's characterological for life. It's a trauma. It impacts you on a characterological level. It's part of your major inclinations in the background context of your life, right? Momentum going on back there. Scary stuff. Lots of energy bound up in it. Conflict is bound up in it. Depressive energies are circulating through there, kind of like sap or something, right? And you got strong emotional reactivity associated with it at the same time, all bound up in it, right? Like an electric charge building towards staticky stasis, right? It's eventually going to end you in life, just like, eventually the boa constrictor ends the life of the rabbit. Usually that's pretty darn decisive when it goes down. It happens, but the squeezing goes on, and then the swallowing and all that kind of stuff. That's the nature of it. Just happens to be the nature of neurosis. It eats you alive over time. You lose faculties as a result of it. You don't want to lose so many faculties you become a schizophrenic or major depressed, I suppose. Those are serious problems to deal with. But impulsive type people wind up in jail all the time over the issues. Anxious people fail to live, fail to face reality and just live it. And they live quietly resigned lives, maybe, as a result. maybe realizing there's something to, something going on psychologically, characterologically even, who knows, depth psychologically, if they've read into Freud at all, at least, or even Jung, who's pretty popular with artists and what have you. So we got, it's like an identification you're sharing with somebody, right? You got your little insignia on your chest and you put it on display. I identify this way. And to a degree that makes you predictable. Some people can read into that depth-wise as you probably have this or that kind of a characterology associated with that. And then here you are as a personality to evaluate all the complexities of that, which is something, in personality psychology, they kind of train people to deal with and sort through to get at the more predictable traits. They call them in personality psychology, right? You have personality traits. A lot of psychologists don't deal that much with characterology, though, in modern terms, compared with some of the depth psychologists of the past. Like Wilhelm Reich is really into it. It's important in my view. It's not something to be, cast out with bathwater, throw the baby out the window kind of a deal. It seems to be going on with Freud. There's compromise associated with Freud. All these people, they're people. This is a dangerous world. It makes people dangerous to a degree. Okay, you might say crazy. The word crazy, right? Unpredictable and dangerous, possibly in people's minds. And they're not too necessarily cognitively clued in as to what is going on with the quote-unquote crazy, so that makes it even worse for them. Makes them potentially dangerous, right? Sometimes. Some of the people that are more often dangerous are actually the ones that are not considered to be ill necessarily. They're the political types that are in charge quite often. Yeah, they turn out to be dangerous. Way dangerous. So, and the guy suffering a mental illness, scale-wise at the very least, less likely dangerous. If he's unpredictable at all, though, that's concerning, right? But, statistically speaking, not necessarily more dangerous, but if they have, mental stability problems, schizophrenic style unpredictability, people are always by nature concerned with that for maybe good reasons you got to respect. And I don't know, impulsive types, they have their way of being rather obviously dangerous, right? Your compulsive types, though, can be so deceptive. And the smarter ones are Machiavellian. They're just, they're in charge. They're the CEO. And dude murdered some people. Tried to bury him out there in the field. Wow. That happened, huh? Boss did that. Oh. The compulsive typology can find itself criminal, right? You live that goldfish bowl reality so well for so long, and next thing you know, you just murdered your whole family. That to me is indicative of undiagnosed mental disorder, but I can't diagnose, so I can say it's a likelihood, right? Yeah, the guy was living it up, and now we just murdered his whole family. For what? Something irrational. Reveals itself rather irrational, man. He fell in love with his secretary, murdered his whole family. It's like, boggles the mind, but it's easy to point the fingers, right? He becomes then the scapegoat for everything that's wrong with society. These guys, man, these CEOs. It's actually everybody to some degree or another, right? A contributing factor. There are contributing factors everywhere. Society is messed up. I'm sorry, but your great civilization isn't as wondrously great as you seem to think. And what's replacing it right now is a true horror. Okay? It's murder. It's mass murder. It's smiling its way right into office and then disappearing with the money when the real tyrants just take over. And they're like, well, kill them all. We're taking over. You're going to have to listen to our music 5 times a day because this is no longer where you live. It's where we live. And this is the land of our cult. It belongs to us. Okay, there's no public street. No, that's the land of our cult. Cultic property, cultic turf. Like you could argue this goat thing appearing all of a sudden is at war with you. But that's kind of, potential. It's a potential in the imagery, right? War as a concept is assigned to Capricorn. The destruction you see going on up in Mars there, or Scorpio, there's a lot of Capricorn imagery in that. That's quick destruction up there in Scorpio, like decisive, bang, it's done. Down in Capricorn, it can be a slow, seductive process. Circling the drain, and again, and again, and again, and again. You might attempt a suicide at some point. And then again, later. It's its own kind of deceptive, complex thing that's as hard to understand as borderline personality disorder. If you're not a specialist in that field that's got experience in the clinic. But, yeah, because so many, characterological conditions, personality disorders, and mental disorders could be just assigned right there. Bang, Capricorn. Just like all the pharmaceuticals, chemicals, drugs, explosives, fuels, and other stuff are assigned there. And, what do these things amount to if they're not handled properly? Poisons, toxins, things that blow up suddenly and become unstable chemically in uncontrolled fashion that could harm people, kill people. So, nature is something to be responsible with, and this aspect of nature is particularly psychological on a clinically significant scale, the symbolism associated with it. Imagine clinicians need to take a break every once in a while and get into some fresh living on vacation just to kind of take a break from it, right? Just to reorient that way and then come back to it and be more resilient and effective, right? Just because of the nature of what goes on over there with that. You don't want it to alter your nature in the negative, right, over time, where you become cynical over time and kind of useless to people because of that. If you're going to be a therapist, you need the resilience, you need the strength, you need the knowledge and understanding and how to apply it, the methods, right? On the night of the murder, all right, they just drive the Porsche right up there. The first vehicle through the gate, probably. They might, it might have been Steve Parent that, kind of checked them through the gate, recognized their faces through the car window. Yeah, it's J.C. Bring and Sharon Tate coming back. They were out having fun or whatever. You're up there talking, maybe sharing that beer with the guard that's going to take over. It might be the person that actually slashes you in the hand. Who knows? There's a lot of weird stuff coming in the sync that I just watched with the visitor, right? Where they kind of hid in the darkness up there and just occupied the area. Coming up over that side of that gate, over on the same side as the button that you push to get the gate open, right? You can kind of go up on the hill and come over the fence there. And if the guard up there that's taking over is an inside man, he's got you distracted and you're not paying enough attention, or maybe you're just coming off duty, you're unplugging the radio 15 minutes after 12, and that's when they're coming over, and your friend there, your guard friend, realizes or just knows what's going on, right? He's an inside man. He might be a Zodiac man for all we know, because Zodiac guy keeps coming up in these things as a possibility. One of the Zodiac people, and he, not necessarily the killer, maybe involved in the process, but one of the, the lions, that comes around to make sure the sights are clear of people before the targets show up in the area. And this goes on a lot when you're targeted by anyone. They know where you go every day. They're there waiting for you, and they got a new ambush for you every day. Vampire people play this game, they want to get their kids in on the game of, the human sacrifice and all that crap. People are rotten today. They really are. It's, in obvious terms, so much worse than the 20th century. They've just changed the entire rule structure over to the British system of organized criminal stupidity unto death. Okay, because that society's suiciding itself out. All right, it's criminally corrupt through the royal family and everything it represents. And honestly, man, all that Magna Carta stuff is just fake because of that. The U.S. Constitution is the only legitimate law on this planet. The only. Everything else is organized crime. All of it. I don't care what religion you think you are from, value-wise. It's a disaster of criminal scope. All right? It's destroying people. All right? Your moralism is shallow, underpinned by, criminal tendencies you might be in touch with to some degree. Because when you're neurotic, criminal tendencies are there. They're like underground, at the very least. Now, the more Machiavellian type people, they dip down into those understandings and then bring them back to the surface and exploit them. And they get good at it. They learn how to manipulate people better than your average psychopath, who's quite often basically a survivor, just getting himself marginalized in life as a result without realizing it, right? A Machiavellian CEO knows how to marginalize himself right into a higher office, all right? If he's going to be marginalized, he's going to make $1 billion doing it, and he's going to be able to hire prostitutes. So, yeah, but your average thuggish person, they don't realize they're marginalizing themselves because other people are going to marginalize them. You don't want to be around people like that. All right. It's horrible. If you're going to be true, you got to hold the line and not be a part of that. In my view, just hold the integrity together somehow. So anyway, Sharon Tate, J.C. Brink show up there. Everything starts rolling at that point, right? Steve Parent, he's going to try to drive out of there. The sync seems to indicate his hand might have been on the car door or something. Just, he's about to reach out. Slash, it happens. The wristwatch gets hit. Why that happens exactly, they might have targeted the wristwatch. They want to put the wristwatch as a symbol in the back of the car or something like that. Slash, bang, up goes, the arm to try to shield, and then bang, 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 bang. So, somebody probably else had to handle the gun, or it seems that way to me. A likely candidate is J.C. Brink. All he has to do is act like he's going up towards the house and then circle back around the garage. He would know the lay of the land there. It's no accident he's got a black Porsche. It's not only symbolic, it's a practical consideration. You could turn the lights off on that thing and kind of drive up to 10070 Cielo Drive and park up there and attend the dinner party there. Maybe with some Manson family members or some Zodiac people, right? If Tex Watson's there, he's got his bayonet. He's probably, one of the chief killers, right? J.C. Brink probably takes on that role too. Knife or gun, it's hard to say. He is a barber, though. Maybe he's fascinated with using the gun. It's hard to say because he's a Scorpio symbol as a barber. Hollywood barber, a very significant one there, right? You can turn somebody like that into an assassin. For 19 neighborhoods, maybe, like, Hollywood neighborhoods, like with Berkowitz being for, 19 neighborhoods in the Bronx, Yonkers area, symbolic of Capricorn networking, right? The Executioner 4, according, to Manny Grossman's information that he's been gaining access to. So that's symbolic right off the bat. So a barber, that's not much of a stretch to, imagine effectively acting as an assassin of some kind, right? Play the symbolic role of a barber in your day life, and then at your secret night life, at that level, you're some kind of a quote-unquote assassin, right? You're playing some kind of Scorpio-type role with Sharon Tate now, who's a Virgo that you're working with. Posing as maybe a couple, but probably not really. Maybe never were, really. It's hard to say. I just don't know all the details of these relationship things going on here, so. But Sharon Tate, probably would have been focused on, ensuring that the clothing trunks got into the house. She just goes back and changes into a bikini. Okay, it's symbolic behavior, right? She expects to take a bloodbath later. So, yeah, and the interrogation is going to start. She's going to stand there and witness everything, find out the truth of what happened, get them to spit it all out. Begging for their lives or whatever. The killers are going to, do most of the dirty work, probably, at least. The designated killers, maybe, if that's indeed what they do. I'm still wrestling with the idea whether Berkowitz was specifically just the one trigger guy at the murders. The police seem to be under the impression that's the case for some reasons that they're revealing now. Through this Manny Grossman release of information, right? With the Manson family and the Tate situation, though, you got a whole mob up there. They've all got to be a presence of some intimidating degree, right? When they got their knives issued, for example, they might just, stand there with their knives out, right? You can't run this way, sorry. They run the other way, and bang, there's Tex Watson. In fact, I still got to read again to look and see if he got, Wojtek Frykowski got shot in the back on the way out the door. Okay. Was he shot? I got to read up on it again. I'll be able to read it in Helter Skelter when I read that again. There's going to have to be a part 2 to this, I guess, for that. But you're interrogated in there, as I pretty much described before. The Zodiac people sync with this murder night at that point. From then on, you got the Lake Berryessa murder, late September. JSK apparently was there for that, but not for the Paul Stein murder in San Francisco and on October 11th, I believe it was. Already in Maine by then. Taxied there, you might say, in the Carmen Gia murderer car version of the car, right? Not the victim version of the car, which, again, is an inside man. So the woman he's up there with who got murdered, guess what? She's a student. They're both students of a sort. She's a student moving on to the next phase soon of her career development, right? Guess what Steve Parent's doing? He's kind of going to school in the coming fall, right? Where did they get their financing? It's hard to say. Is she network connected somehow for financing for school? Or did they just select her for symbolic reasons because of what happened to Steve Parent in his car, by the way? Guess who else is a student? A more advanced student. That would be Paul Stein, the taxi cab driver. I believe an English literature student of specializing level student involvement, right? Becoming a master. So A master is special. They've specialized in some fashion that people value. So you get a master's degree, you've specialized to a certain degree in the direction of building a career, a practice, right? Of some kind or another in life that, you'd be inclined to maintain as a matter of course, no matter what happens, right? You keep the practice alive for yourself in your life as part of your life. If I guess genuine enthusiasm brought you into the field of practice where you practice. So I think I kind of corrected some things with the Manson family murder, trying to straighten things out, right? Orient things, relate things to other things, and get things kind of straight, Steve Parent would be like this unwittingly directed individual that's network connected, has no idea he's going to be killed. And there's probably no reason for him to have been killed other than he's one of Abigail Folger's people that supposedly is going to get money for school. And, that's all ruined now, isn't it? And, they arranged that he would be there that night. And he's, Steve Parent's a symbolic name. Parent, right? So then you got the situation out of Lake Berryessa. It's almost kind of like the situation with the end of the house, the Tate bedroom, the master bedroom out by the pool. Okay, there's a reservoir out there, Lake Berryessa, a recently made reservoir, I think early 60s or something like that. Or it's still a fresh developing reservoir, right? Almost like a swimming pool. The grass seems to come right up out of the water almost, right? It's a lot different looking now compared with photographs of the late 60s. It's a more advanced development of reservoir now. But back then it was a lot more like, they just flooded this place. Like a pool, right? And to an infant, a swimming pool like that behind the house is pretty big looking little body of water, just like Trip Pond looks like Trip Lake, and you're even conditioned to use the term lake when you're a child, raised sometimes on that lake, right, up in Maine. It's actually a pond. It seems kind of small to an adult, but to a kid it's a magical place. Somehow it's the right size place to be located. Seems like a lake, especially a small child. It's a big expanse of water as far as you're concerned. It goes off into the distance. It's magical. In the summertime, the light seems to just come off the water a certain way. And the illumination of fun arises out of, games, fun and games in the water, right? You're a child on Trip Pond, but you think of it as lake. And you're even, it's called Trip Lake when you're around, right? I don't know if they go back and forth between calling it Trip Pond or Trip Lake or not through the decades, but right now it's called Trip Pond. TRIPP, Pond. And it is a magical place, the child even situated right by that little island on one end of the lake, right? Opposite from where they got the youth camp activities on the other end of the lake, right? It's a secretive little place. A kid can be kind of secreted in there, right? On that cottage, that gray cottage with red and white accents, right? He knows all about that place, just like he would know all about 10050 Cielo Drive. He knows where the cesspool is. He's seen his grandfather uncover the thing to get a dead frog out of it. Somehow got up in there. That was blocking things. Really yuck. But it's just a few inches underneath the soil, right? The soil kind of covering the top of it is a big old round tank. Almost looks like an oil tank, but it's smaller. It's underground. You just cover it back over with a layer of soil and make sure it's patted down good. And it's like, wow, that thing was there this whole time. Right in front of the cottage, too. A motorcycle, right? Like in a movie in the late 60s, people ride their motorcycles into the pool. I forget the name of the movie. could symbolize that cesspool because it's so close to the surface. You park the wrong Harley Davidson on top of that thing and you're going to take a bath in a cesspool. But, the Lake Berryessa murder situation, it mirrors the Sharon Tate bedroom situation. You got the picnic blanket out there and you got the young couple socializing out there. Yeah, they synced it. And they had JSK out there at Lake Berryessa too. Kind of watching events, witnessing horrible, horrible events, right? So, yeah, his little cap guns in tow. They buy him cap guns, the Zodiac killer people. Shopping around, I guess, San Francisco. We're shopping in San Francisco, right? That costume type stuff, like a full cowboy costume with a cowboy hat. Shows up in an SNL skit, I guess in the 90s, after Home Alone became popular, and that the Home Alone kid was used for the skit. Zodiac code drawn out in that skit, right? Symbolically speaking. Really strange things, right? To be conditioned with. That covers the murder, I guess. Kind of covers up for some of the sloppiness of my last presentation, getting the chronological continuity out of place and just losing touch with certain things. The taxi cab, Paul Stine syncing with Steve Parent, right? So there's an inside man undermines the whole thing. Oh, and also in the sink. In the sink, there's a possibility that the Zodiac killer didn't leave the area of the Paul Stine murder, as some people described. Like the police officers described somebody walking away from the area that they saw. Might have been the killer, might not have been. The killer might have actually stayed in the house where the teenagers were partying nearby. That's his escape, is hide in that house. Network house. Of course, the murder takes place right in front of the house. You got the, teenagers partying together. It becomes symbolic of goat partying. They're keeping their youths alive with their goat networking and partying together. There's some kind of partying that they do just exclusively with themselves, naturally enough. Other kind of partying, they're mixing with just general public people, right? And targeting people, probably, for certain things. Getting people involved in things, the whole point of getting somebody nefariously involved can be way more sophisticated than what I'm trying to get at. Because what I rely too much on probably is, the common everyday lore of, I remember when I was in Hollywood at that party and they said they had, girls there. And I said no. And I got away from there. But it happened. It happened, and you don't really know if it really happened or not, but that sticks in your mind, and it comes back up again when you're discussing these things. How you get so many people involved in stuff that's compromising has a lot to do with the sophistication associated with socializing with people a certain way. Get them to compromise themselves and get it on video. Some significant way. Saying stuff, right? Or being in the same room with stuff that, is never revealed. So you don't even know if it really happened or not, right? And again, I keep reiterating the idea that I think they're using 8-year-old girls these days because of what I've been seeing in things like the Visitor Sync, right? It's kind of a Spartan thing, that I think they might be doing. Because by the time you're 8, like boys of 8 in Sparta would begin their military training. But the first 7 years, you're with mother, right? Characterologically, they might have done that for that reason, just to keep their citizens from being completely psychopathically nutballs, right? And becoming positively dangerous to their own society, right? Rather than supremely militarily capable. Trained from the age of 8. So they might be trying to do stuff like that with girls. They might have done stuff with girls back then along these lines, training them for certain tasks that they become particularly good at by the time they're adult women, right? And the training begins at 8 because they can handle the rigor of it without becoming crazy, dangerous, unpredictable, dangerous, to own people, own population. You're not structured enough psychologically to handle the stressors that you encounter in life if training along those lines starts too early. Like with JSK, things were just practically right after birth. The whole training and the mess begins, right? Because, how people handle stressors in life is an indicator of, how stable they are as individuals. Okay. Personality disordered people are personality established people. Okay, they're suffering a disorder of personality development along certain lines that turns out to be negative, right? But personality tends to establish itself very reliably, right? In some manner of stable expression most of the time. That's why personality disordered people can be so deceptive, right? Obviously, mentally disordered people, on the other hand, tend to show symptoms, signs. They're starting to kind of show instabilities and dysfunctions and distresses, emotional distresses, right? Something's happening here. Something's coming to a head here. Something's changing. Or I'm not responding well enough to these changes that are taking place, these stressors that are coming up, and now maybe I should get help. In general terms, I'm talking here, right? So, with JSK as part of the experiment and with MK Ultra, you would definitely be working to build a personality structure, a structured personality of a certain individual type. Sure, it's a clear and present personality of some kind. They undermine the ability to fully adapt in the charm department, right? Becoming some kind of charming individual, like sweet talk his way into robbing somebody blind or whatever. So, yeah, they're just ruining on somebody, just utterly ruining on somebody across the board. That at the very least is food for thought in life. Is personality disorder established of novel nature? Pushed as far as they can push it. Push it in the direction of instability if you can. But it's personality disorder of some kind, right? You could call it, it's like did, except guess what? The instabilities aren't there. It's a lot like with developing a personality disorder, isn't it? Compared with the mental disorder of did itself. Where the instabilities associated with the mental instabilities revealing themselves are associated with that disorder that are typical of that disorder. Well, in the mental disorder, they reveal themselves quite often in characteristic form, along lines, written down nossologically in the DSM and what have you. But this, you develop a novel personality disorder for this individual of some kind, and then just watch it, see what it does. It's worse, it's more cruel probably even than being a Manchurian Candidate, right? The Manchurian Candidate would wind up in prison, I don't believe it much in that whole Manchurian Candidate thing anyway. People have probably practiced mind control techniques in the past. Some crazy cultic stuff going on here and there, maybe. Almost like tuberculosis, pustules here and there on the planet. Trying to develop, and then maybe the planet immunizes itself against it. That's a bad idea. But people became seriously learned, in my view, in past history. Prehistoric history, we marvel at what we're capable of doing now, and it's truly interesting to marvel at, but people have done rather equivalent things in the past, learnedness-wise, including the secret tree of alchemy. I don't think any of the organized criminal organizations today that have control over it effectively developed it. They commandeered it. They He basically took it under their secretive wings and effectively just took it away from people. You know, terrorized people, scattered them from places like Göbekli Tepe, right? Maybe in conjunction with, you know, the onset of drought or volcanic disruption in the region. So, having discussed that Manson situation a little bit better, so people get an idea of what must have happened, I think I'll leave you with that. And thanks for listening.